My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Most people believe that you must die to get to heaven, but those who have suffered near-death experiences tell a different tale. Our quest for happiness and peace can be found while we're alive. Although we might feel lost at times, our internal, authentic selves truly know why we're here. Living through difficulties is part of growing into our authentic selves. The secret is not allowing life to live you, but in knowing what drives you and choosing to live life on your own terms. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, award-winning illustrator, art director, and animator Robert Kopecky knows this well. Robert had 3 near-death experiences and with each gained insight and perspective on living our best life in this life now. Robert explores and teaches about the lessons he learned. He shared his experiences in his first book, How to Survive Life and Death, and blogs at BeliefNet, The Mindful Word, and OMTimes Life. He joins me this week to discuss his new book, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. Please welcome to Destination Unlimited my guest and friend, Robert Kopecky. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening, Victor, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So wonderful to have you back. It's been a couple of years since our last interview. So for our new listeners, let's give them a taste of your story and the 3 near-death experiences that changed your life. Your early life was kind of rough and tumble, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I had kind of a difficult childhood, and that led me to hitting the road at a young age. So I took off and traveled and started living kind of different lives. I did all kinds of different jobs and lived in different cities and had a lot of experience that way before I settled into to my career as an underground cartoonist originally, and then as an illustrator and art director and animation designer.
Tell us about that underground cartoon. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I was in Los Angeles in the early 80s is when I first went to school there, and there was kind of the punk movement going on, and so there had been the Zap comic book tradition that I had been aware of living in California. I grew up in California, and so I naturally kind of gravitated towards that because I'd always had a talent for drawing. That was just my karma was to draw and create artwork, I think. And one thing led to another, and I started doing illustrations for magazines and textbooks and newspapers and Hollywood and all of that kind of stuff, album covers and the like when we had those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, sure.
And that led me, from one town to another, and bigger clients, and I ended up designing and art directing animated television shows for Cartoon Network and PBS Kids and people like that.
Now, what were the circumstances of your 3 near-death experiences, and how did each one differ?
The first one was a single-car accident where I was driving through a part of town that I didn't know very well at dusk, and I had a cassette deck malfunction, which will date that pretty well, I think. My cassette deck made that bloopy sound that when something goes wrong, and I was pulling the tape out with a long strand, and I apparently glanced off of an oddly parked car and went right into a telephone pole. I was probably going about 35 miles an hour or so. And almost instantaneously, I found myself at the top of the telephone pole next to the street light, looking down at the scene of the crash. I could look over hedges and bushes into people's yards and stuff and see the porch lights snap on and people come running out, and they called an ambulance. And I realized that this body that was in the car wreck below me was me. I tried to kind of levitate downwards. I didn't seem to really have a body, as I recall. But I tried to move down and communicate with people, and I couldn't. I apparently had kind of a guardian angel behind me. I was not alone, and I was shepherded through what I recall as being a sort of a cloud bank eventually into this sort of pastoral place, like a park or nature, and I had this kind of an interview or a chat with a celestial entity that I don't really remember specifically. I try not to elaborate too much on the memories themselves. I try to keep my original memories intact with the near-death experiences, because I know that memory is a little unreliable. So I don't really remember who this was I was talking to, but I remember that we hashed a lot of things out. And then I woke up. I came to again after about 18 hours of being unconscious. I came to in a hospital. And that was my first near-death experience, which an out-of-body experience is the commonly called motif of it. And in the book, I have a section. The first section is perspective, and that's that first near-death experience taught me that gift of perspective, the relationship that we have as these kind of diaphanous, effervescent energy beings who are occupying these bodies. It's once you see yourself in that kind of situation, it's a little hard to get the genie back into the bottle.
Now, how old were you when that first one happened?
I was about 26 or so, 25 or 26.
And did you have any specific spiritual or religious bent at that time?
I did not so much. I had been a searcher as a kid. I didn't grow up with any kind of religion, but so I kind of dropped in and out of them myself, sort of searching. And I was a martial artist. I had a teacher who was a spiritual guy and taught me meditation and taught me a little Lao Tzu and things like that. So I had a little bit of that kind of stuff going on, and I guess I was kind of a spiritual wanderer, really, up until that point. I didn't really...
I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
I didn't really attach the experience to anything religious in nature, and I wasn't really able to find a community to talk to anybody about it. There wasn't that much of that back then in the mid-'80s. I think PMH Atwater and Kenneth Ring and Raymond Moody, I believe, had their books out and stuff, but there was not really a community of near-death experiencers. So I just kind of went back about my life and kind of suppressed the experience to a degree.
So getting back to the actual experience itself, you would define this as basically free consciousness. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did not lose consciousness. That's part of how to get to heaven without really dying is that if we're always alive, if I'm alive before I was born and I'm alive after I die, then in any life we can experience some of these same characteristics that we generally associate with heaven. The kind of transcendent connectedness and the pure love, the experience of pure love, and this kind of karmic instruction and stuff. This is all available to us in any life that we're living. I felt myself enfolded into a greater consciousness. Like I said, I wasn't really aware of having a body to speak of, but I was still myself. I was still observing it through my eyes in some way, and I just felt that I didn't have any boundaries. Like I wasn't limited by serial thought anymore, but kind of enfolded into this expansive, illuminative matrix of loving intelligence, so to speak, that so many near-death experiencers describe.
And how would you, just to summarize the celestial being that you were with at that time, how would you sort of encapsulate that story? What essence did you detect from that?
Congeniality was probably about it. There was nothing. I don't remember anything particularly fabulous about it, or of a truly heavenly nature in the sort of classic way to think about it. It was kind of like you and I chatting right now, as I recall. And so, like I said, I try not to ascribe any more to these memories than I actually recalled. I'm hoping that this story is the same as I would have told you 2 or 3 days after the accident,
Okay, and then you wake up 18 hours later, and what was your first thoughts when you came out of your sleep?
Oh, I had no idea where I was. I'd been moved apparently from one hospital to another to get plastic surgery. And I didn't have insurance. I didn't have health insurance at the time. I was pretty young, and they wheeled me out to the loading dock at the hospital and put me in a yellow cab with my head all bandaged, and they sent me home in a yellow cab.
Wow.
Yeah, that was, and then a couple of days, or not a couple of days, but about a week and a half later or so, when I was a little more mobile, I went back to the scene of the accident because I just wanted to kind of confirm. I didn't talk to anybody about this specifically, but I returned to walk around that where it happened, and I could see into the yards and in people's driveways and stuff over these hedges that I really only could have seen from the top of the telephone pole. So I kind of confirmed for myself that I had been up there and had been looking down like that.
Now, you had mentioned that at the time there really wasn't a community of people with common experience that was known that you could get together with and share your experience with. What did you think about what had happened to you? What was your summation of what had happened to you?
I was just kind of confused about it, I think. I don't remember as having any particular big urge to solve it in any way. I was just kind of vaguely baffled, I think, by the whole thing, and I did try to talk to people about it on a couple of occasions, but they were just either sort of understanding in a friendly way and then kind of dismissive, or they looked at me funny and kind of rolled their eyes, that kind of thing. So I just moved on. I got swallowed right back up by material life and was very busy. I had only been married for a few years at that point, and just got caught up in what we might call normal life again. That
was Robert Kopecky's first near-death experience, and we'll discuss more about his second and third after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness and action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this evening is Robert Kopecky. He's the author of How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. So, Robert, in the first segment, we were talking about your first of 3 near-death experiences. What was your second near-death experience?
The second one came about 6 or 7 years later, and like I said, the first one had not changed the course of my life a great deal, but in a way it really had, because I slowly had a need to kind of go back out and try to discover again, I think. And my first wife and I quit our jobs in Los Angeles and traveled around the world for about a year. And although we were not particularly spiritual people, every place we went was spiritual in nature, to temples and ruins, and we explored the Mayan underworld before it was a popular thing to do, and searched for tiki in the South Pacific and stuff. We spent a year on the road. And when I came back to San Francisco and got back into my career field, I got a call from my cousin and was unfortunately invited to the bedside of my aunt, who played a pivotal role in my childhood for me. She'd been kind of a savior for me. But I was at her deathbed when she passed, and it sort of knocked me for a loop. And I don't think that I really was able to quite process it, and I went a little haywire. My marriage ended up on the rocks, and I moved to New York City, and I began to live this kind of downtown lifestyle, this bohemian, nocturnal, self-destructive lifestyle that led me to have, kind of a toxic response to my life, whether an actual drug overdose or just a cumulative effect of a self-destructive lifestyle. I'm not sure what exactly, because it was never diagnosed specifically. I fell out on the floor of my apartment one night and lost all sense of my body. I was in a state of paralysis, and just felt sort of the life draining out of me. And simultaneously, the room filled in with a brilliant white cloud. And I felt again liberated in this way that I was sort of free of the material constraints of my body. And again, it supported and enfolded into this expansive, sort of illuminative field of love that so many near-death experiencers talk about, which I equate with heaven, the sensations of heaven. And again, I wasn't alone. I felt that there was a presence with me who directed me to look into the cloud, and a kind of a screen opened up and began to show these scenes from my life. So this is typically called a life review experience. It was not the best of. This is not the highlights reel from my life, but these were these kind of seminal, formative moments from my life where I may not have been present with the kind of quality I needed to be at the time. I may have been doing something to somebody and not have known what the consequences of it were, or I was kind of skating past an opportunity, or episodes that where I was not at my best. I hadn't really been present for them. And I don't remember exactly the details of each of these, but there, as I recall, like 5 or 6 of these scenes kind of strung together in this oddly interactive way, not like they were shown on a screen, but like I was experiencing them again. And then the person that I was living with at the time, I started to kind of hear her voice hollering, and it cut through the experience inside of the cloud, and the whole thing kind of started to fade, and I came back into reality with my girlfriend at the time, hollering about calling an ambulance. And I very slowly kind of returned back. The blood started flowing again and stuff, but I had this experience and these sort of profound moments where I had lacked presence in my life, and that experience stuck with me a little bit more. That changed my life at the time. I had a kind of a conversion of sorts, because I left New York, I left the relationship I was in, and I moved back out west where I'd come from originally.
How old were you at the time?
I was about 33 or 4 at the time. Yeah.
So about 8 years before, after the first near-death experience. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm, yeah.
And what was the outcome of that? What lessons did you learn? What did you bring forward from that?
Well, the thing that I realized from that ultimately, and not necessarily the lessons didn't come necessarily at the time so much. I mean, I was obviously aware of them, but it wasn't until years later when I studied and meditated a lot, when I'd really had this major shift in my life and headed on another path where I could discover what the lessons were. I realized that presence was the great lesson that I learned from that the quality with which we occupy this moment, this eternal moment when we're always living. My life has never been much different. My experience of life has never been much different from the time I was a kid to now. It's just that, unfortunately, the body I'm riding around in is not the same as it used to be. I hopefully have some more wisdom and some more experience, but we always have this moment in which we can focus and engage in the real aspect of our life, the time when we can really make changes, when we can really be present for each other. So this was the gift of presence that I was given. And that's the second part of the book, is examining presence and what it means in our lives.
And the second near-death experience, the guide or celestial presence that you had with you, was it similar, or do you recall it to be similar to the first?
Yes, I do, and at this point now, I'm quite certain that it was the same, that it is the same, that I do have a guardian angel, so to speak, and I believe in that I'm always surrounded. I mean, that's one thing about a life review is that it's a little bit scary, because it means that somebody's keeping track of all of this, Victor.
Sure.
It means that it's not going unreported or undocumented. There seems to be some kind of fabulous spiritual technology that can actually replay it all in this timeless sense to us, and so that is controlled by an intelligence of which my higher power, my guardian angel, is a part, and I recognize her. I think it's a she, in my experiences, as having been this entity that has been with me in these instances.
And this understanding of the importance of presence, did this have a change not only in your outlook on presence, but on your spiritual background?
Yeah, it sure did, because I realized that all of this beautiful past spiritual wisdom that's in texts and writings and poetry has the same importance in this moment as it ever did. The wisdom, I explore the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada, the Gospel of Thomas, and the poetry of Rumi in the present section of the book, because like the Bhagavad Gita says, everything that changes is not real. Reality exists in the unchanging eternal. Those who experience both live in truth. Stuff like that, that is ever applicable to our state of being in the moment. And in a way, these texts describe a path to heaven that comes out of the past and is just as powerful for us today.
Let's briefly talk about the concept of the life review, because that's something that others who have experienced near-death experiences talk about. Is life review an opportunity to look at ourselves and make corrections? Is that what this is about?
Yes. In my case, this gift of presence informed me that I need to be right where I am. I need to occupy this eternal moment always with a kind of open-hearted focus and compassion that engages me in this greater intelligence of being, so that when things are coming to me, synchronicities and responsibilities, I can really be here for you, for example. I can really be there for somebody that I can help. I can witness the opportunities and the engagements that I can make to grow and expand myself in terms of my own spiritual evolution, and the opportunity to help others to gain their spiritual evolution too. So that's the lesson of presence that has stuck with me, and that I always try to apply with some vigilance. It's so easy to skate past important things in our life because we're just thinking of something else, that we miss a lot of these really miraculous wonders that are happening around us all the time.
Is life review something that people can have or engage in a practice of form without having a near-death experience?
Yes, I do believe so, because the nature of our memories are not dissimilar to what I experienced. When I think back to certain lessons that I learned in the past that have stuck with me, they have the quality of that box of time kind of feeling. And I realize that I am in every moment creating my karma. I am taking my karma from the past and I'm extending it into the future based on the cause and effect that I'm creating now. So I have a greater sense of being able to sort of conduct my life, almost like an orchestra conductor in a way, by being engaged in this very moment.
And this is something that each of us can do even without having that near-death experience.
Yeah, I think that we can access this kind of self-realization through meditation, certainly, contemplation and prayer. I give tips throughout the book about how to kind of more effortlessly engage in that vigilance that's required for us to sort of open our eyes and recognize the sacred in everything and the importance of our engagement in the moment. See, the thing about the near-death experiences that's a real takeaway for me is that I didn't die. I went to another life. Whatever that other life was, I'm not exactly sure, but it was created by my karma, by the actions and experiences that I am accruing and engaging in all the time. And so the fact that we are always alive, and since we all have, at some point, experienced a taste of heaven in this life, you know what that feels like, that transcendent connectedness and that sense of that understanding of kind of your purpose and people needing you, discovering love in your life. Those things are consistent throughout whatever life we're living. And so we can always go to heaven and hell, or hell, in whatever life we're in.
My guest is Robert Kopecky. He's the author of the new book, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. Robert, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about your work.
You can get the book at any of the major booksellers. I always prefer that people check out their local bookshops and ask for it there. But you can also check in on my my website, which is www.robertkopecky.com, or go to my blog, which is robertkopecky.blogspot.com, where I'm posting essays and links and things like that all of the time. So it's available wherever. You can just Google me.
And we'll be back with more of these amazing experiences of Robert Kopecky and his advice from the near-death experiences after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
This is you over 30 years ago.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
And this is your mom now.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Roles change without us noticing. That's why AARP gives you the information to provide even better care for your loved one. Visit aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this evening is Robert Kopecky. He's the author of How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. So, Robert, we talked about your first near-death experience and what you took away from that. Your second, which was even more profound, in which you realized that presence was so important in our lives. What was your third? First of all, how old were you, and what was your third experience like?
The third one, I was about, I think I was 40 years old, in fact. So it was, again, about 7 years or so after my second one. And, the thing that I tell people about having 3 near-death experiences, Victor, is don't do it if you can possibly, help it. Try not to have 3 near-death experiences, but if one must, as I apparently had to, then I would have to say that this was my least favorite. Was my third. It was certainly the most painful. I had started moving my life from New York City to the West, and I was in a small Arizona town that I'd leased a house in, and I'd met a woman. I was going to get married again, and I was out there from New York on a Super Bowl Sunday. I went to a sports bar and watched the Super Bowl with some friends, and then I went out into a plaza, and again, this will date it because I called my fiance on a payphone, and as I was on the payphone, I was assaulted by a kind of a big punk kid, like a skinhead, sort of neo-Nazi kind of kid that there were around that neighborhood. And in those days, it's a little more common, I think, in a lot of places. But he apparently didn't like the way I was dressed. Maybe I stood out a little bit as looking a little too metrosexual or something like that. And he started to assault me while I was on the phone. And I kind of talked him down. And then he came back again more violently, and I made a terrible mistake in that moment, and I punched him right on the chin and knocked him flat on his back. And the people around me applauded, and they gave me this kind of confirmation like I'd done the right thing because they had witnessed the whole scene. And I sort of strode off and jumped on my bicycle and tried to make good my escape, and didn't realize that there was a van full of these guys, and they pulled up alongside of me and hit me in the back of the head with something like a crowbar or a tire iron or something, and I went headfirst into the curb. And I was a little bit more tied to physical reality in that it was a little less celestial, my experience. I was still released into that sense of the supportive field of loving intelligence, kind of that transcendent connectedness experience that we have. But I had a sense of the physical, the material kind of crunching. Apparently they stomped and kicked on my unconscious body for an hour or so. And I wasn't in a place that was as typically heavenly as you might consider. It was a little bit more like, when I think about it, it was almost like being inside of a body. It was kind of womb-like, or almost like being under the ground, almost subterranean. I still felt safe and warm and loved and all that. And there was apparently a group of entities around me, and they were telling me that I needed to go back. And I didn't want to. I had it at that point with the material world as we know it, apparently, and so I struggled against it. But they were gently insistent and sort of pushed me back through this kind of veil or membrane, and I popped through and opened my eyes up, laying on my back on the sidewalk in this Arizona town, and there was an emergency medical guy over me who said, "He's back," and that was my third most painful near-death experience, and the one where I learned that apparently we have a purpose that we need to try to complete in this life, that we're here for a reason, and that's what I came back from that experience with.
And tell me a little bit more about this group of the counselors, coaches, angels, whatever it was that you were dealing with in that experience.
Yeah, I don't really have a distinct memory of them. In in the years since How to Survive Life and Death came out, I've had an opportunity to become part of the near-death experience community. I've done events, and I've met a lot of other experiencers, and certainly heard and read a lot of stories. And while all of my experiences are a typical motif, there are also aspects of it that we all share too. Some people have very distinct memories of the exact persons that they met, whether they are, deceased relatives or angels or religious figures, things like that. It is kind of culturally exclusive. In my case, I'm not able to attach any kind of real characteristics other than just this loving benevolence and this kind of guidance or karmic instruction kind of that I got from the entities in my near-death experiences.
So in each of your experiences, you would say that the role of the guardian angel or the higher self was the teacher.
Absolutely, yeah. And having had the three that were so different and having experienced all these other people's stories made me really wonder about what the differences were and what they meant, and how near-death experiences seem to be custom-made, kind of as mine were to the time in my life when I experienced each. And then what they have in common, which is what I consider to be the heaven aspect of it, that we are enfolded into this expansive divine consciousness of loving intelligence, this feeling of complete love, a transcendent sense of total connectedness, this kind of innate understanding that we are here for a shared purpose and for our own personal reason, some kind of mission. And in each one there was this receiving instruction. It was like becoming teachable on a very profound level, where somebody is laying on you how this works and what you need to be doing to further the cause of your karma, so to speak, or to build it with more consciousness.
You had mentioned meeting a lot of other experiences at these gatherings and conventions. Do you have any coming up?
Yes, I'm going to actually be speaking for the International Association for Near-Death Studies, the Virginia Beach chapter at the Casey Institute, the Edgar Casey Institute in Virginia Beach, and that will be April 14th and 15th coming up. And then out in next November, I'll be at the Afterlife Awareness Conference in Orlando, Florida. That'll be November 1st through the 4th.
What is it like when a group of experiences get together?
It's terrific, I write about this in the book too, in the present section of it, when I'm talking about Rumi, because the Sufis, Rumi was this wonderful Sufi poet, and Coleman Barks generously gave me his translations to use, but the Sufis are completed in one another. It's like when I first met you, Victor. You walk into a room and there's somebody there and you feel like you know them very well. It's like, there you are. I knew I'd find you here, that kind of thing. And so we call this, in Sufism, they call it the friend. And one is completed in the beloved, in the field of divine consciousness. One finds this kind of other side or other part that makes one whole in a way. And when you go to these conferences of near-death experiencers, everybody's like that, Everybody's got kind of lit up, and you don't really even have to share your stories with one another to share this kind of heavenly sort of vibration that I try to pass along through this book. Everybody's on the same wavelength, maybe literally.
Now, you've met Dr. Eben Alexander, obviously, right?
Yes, I have, yeah.
And I interviewed him a couple of years ago when his story came out, and for those who are not familiar with him, he actually is a neurosurgeon who sustained a very severe infection of the spine and ultimately the brain. And his wife was told by physicians that he would not come back. And after, I don't remember the exact number of days, I think it was 7 days, he did come back. And he's a scientist, first and foremost was a scientist, had this experience, and came to the understanding that it could not have been anything other than a true experience because of the fact he brought back information that he did not have from his normal life experience. What was it like meeting with him?
Oh, it was a lot of fun. He's a very nice guy, and again, really on the same page. I think one of the things about Dr. Alexander is he's got such fabulous bona fides, that having an actual neuroscientist explain his relationship to divine consciousness, carries a lot of credibility. I'm just an underground cartoonist, who got hit on the head a few times.
I think you're a lot more than that. We know that.
But we do have this in common, and that is that my experience of consciousness was not something that was generated, I think, from my brain. I do believe that our brains generate consciousness on their own to a degree, but I don't think that we really know. I mean, including Dr. Alexander's experience, all spiritual experience is anecdotal, ultimately, in nature. And so this was just his report. But to me, there seems to be ample evidence to suggest that we don't know what's going on with our brains exactly. No matter how well charted they are, you still can't describe what's going on in the actual territory. I think the brain is a receiver and a transmitter and a projector of the field of consciousness, a greater field of existent consciousness that is the ground of all being, essentially, and that we remain engaged in that even when, due to bacterial meningitis in Dr. Alexander's case, your brain is completely dead. I didn't have that kind of observation happening in a hospital setting to know whether I was clinically alive or not. Those things, it wasn't recorded that way in my experiences. So my experiences are of a slightly more anecdotal nature, perhaps, but I still had this experience and continue to have this experience all the time. Like I said, you can't really put the genie back in the bottle. There is this engagement in divine consciousness and a recognition of the sacred in everything. And I think that Dr. Alexander shares that as a non-materialist, as we would call it now.
Absolutely. My guest is Robert Kopecky. He's the author of How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. We'll be back with more of Robert after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
Change and growth are part of natural life, and also part of your spiritual life. Everyone needs support and guidance, especially during life passages. Upgrade yourself with the OMTimes Experts program. With OMTimes Experts, you have access to the best intuitive coaches, spiritual teachers, counselors, astrologists, and oracles. Our team was carefully selected so you can trust. Find out more at experts.omtimes.com.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
My name is Lola Silvestri, and I'm going to be 95 this year. I was very independent. I fell, and I had to have Meals on Wheels. America, let's do lunch.
1 in 6 seniors faces the threat of hunger, and millions more live in isolation. Drop off a hot meal and say a quick hello. Volunteer for Meals on Wheels by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org. This message brought to you by Meals on Wheels America and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Robert Kopecky. He's the author of How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. So, Robert, we talked about your 3 near-death experiences and the lessons that you brought back from those experiences. Some people have religiously linked or culturally linked near-death experiences, and others are simpler. Having had 3, how do you explain those differences from person to person?
Well, it's very interesting to see that, particularly when you start to study and examine the near-death experiences of people from different cultures, because if you are Tibetan Buddhist, it's very likely that you will enter into the realm of the bardos, these kind of surrealistic lives in between lives as we move through our karma to discover where we're going to be reincarnated next. And often they're accompanied by Hama, the Buddhist god of death. Christians, obviously, you'll hear people talking about meeting Jesus or meeting God or seeing choruses of winged angels and the like, and so forth. It goes that way with all different cultural experiences. So I think that there's a level of what you might call pattern recognition, either in the projection of our consciousness into the next dimension, or when we come back, the means we have to describe it. Each of us is made up of this kind of karmic package of information based on our experiences, material and spiritual experiences, and we associate with the forms of our lives, of our material lives, and so that's the way that we have to describe what our experiences are. We come back with these archetypes, as Jung would call them, that we use to talk about something that's sort of difficult to talk about. I remember Terence McKenna, who was kind of a card, said, "There's a transcendental dimension beyond language. It's just hard as hell to talk about." But if you look at life in this realm, in this world, people are dropped into heaven or hell. They're dropped into all different kinds of situations, and in the next extra-dimensional experience that we have after this material one, all bets are really kind of off. The limitations don't exist in the same way, I think, and our pure karma and energy will create perhaps more illusion in a way, but this another life that's based on this package of karma that we bring to it.
And what is the atheist experience?
Let me see. I don't know that I could ever really identify completely with that. I'll try to put myself into that space. I was at least an agnostic for many years.
I'm sorry, I'm not referring to you. I'm talking about those that you've met at these conferences that have proclaimed either agnostic or atheistic beliefs and then had the near-death experience.
Yeah, I haven't met too many, actually. Most near-death experiencers come back with some kind of belief. It definitely changes your perspective.
The old expression, there are no atheists in a foxhole. I guess there's no atheists in the near-death community, huh?
Well, there are. I think likewise, if you are carrying a package of karma that sends you into an extra dimension, and your package of karma is a black screen, and you come back with these mental formations, this pattern recognition that gives you the need to express it as having been a blank nothingness, then I think that that's the potential of what your near-death experience can be. I believe that all near-death experiences, I think that they're all valid, but I think that they're all based on our individual, custom-made kind of package of karma,
So we're saying heaven is what we make it.
Yeah, and it's available here. It's available now. And I think that we all know that if we sit in that presence of this timeless moment, we can all recollect in our hearts moments of this kind of transcendent connectedness and love. And it's the experience of a field of love, the energy of love coming in and going out, witnessing it in our lives, having it guide us through the forms of our life, the food or the architecture or the art or the relationships that we have. I don't know exactly what an atheist comes to from that, but they are, I believe, looking for love in their life too.
What are the commonalities of the description of heaven that near-death experiences express?
Well, some of those things that I've been mentioning about the kind of transcendent connectedness, definitely, and then a radiance. There is always an illuminative radiance, which when you stop and you pay attention to life, we're always taking part in here, too, whether it's coming out of our computer screens or coming out of the light shining off of an infant's face or bouncing off of a beautiful bay or a river in some scene in nature. So there's that radiant illumination that is an aspect of everybody's near-death experience stories in common. The experience of the field of pure love, and then that kind of receiving instructive guidance or receiving karmic teachings, kind of, I think.
You believe that we experience different forms of death that are essential to our spiritual growth. What do you mean by a different form of death?
Well, if we're eternal beings and, we're alive before we were born and we're alive after we die, then why exactly do we have to die? Why put us through that is what I'm kind of curious. Apparently, the soul sort of requires a death experience to go to heaven in a way, and the death experience is not limited to the actual physical death. I say that because I had those 3 near-death experiences, none of which really absolutely changed my life in a really profound way. It altered me. Each one altered me and altered my direction. But it wasn't until some years after my 3rd near-death experience that I had this moment in my life where absolutely everything stopped working, where everything I thought I was supposed to be, apparently wasn't anymore. I'd lost my 2nd marriage. My career was in the dumps. I had no sense of who I was or what my purpose was in life. And I experienced this dark night of the soul, which amounted to what you might call an ego death. And the ego death is probably the most important death that we can have. And I think it's why we probably have to die, too, is to be reduced to this state of absolute humility where we become teachable at last, where these forms, these imaginative forms of who we're supposed to be and our self-importance and stuff are gone. And so when I experienced that form of death, my whole life turned around, and this entire world of expanding consciousness became available to me, and I ended up becoming a published author at 58 years old, without ever having any experience before that. So this is the direction that my life is leading me, and I see it as purpose now.
Absolutely. You talk about people being able to get to heaven without dying and having these experiences that they can bring together in their life, these magical moments that seem to be transcendent. I remember one such moment. I was very spiritual as a kid, and then in my teens and my early adult years, I had to put a lot of that away in terms of career and such. And in my late 30s, I started getting involved in yoga and meditation and group meditation. And I remember after my first yoga class and really deep group-guided meditation, leaving that building and walking outside and seeing a tree, and for the first time recognizing that I could see this beautiful energy around this tree, that this tree wasn't just the tree that I would know, the beautiful tree, but it was glowing. It was actually glowing. There was a field of energy around it. And I remember that reawakening that took place for me in my late 30s when I had that. What are the other ways that people can get in touch with those feelings of being in heaven while being alive?
Well, I do think that's a big part of it, and I write about this as the recognition of the sacred in everything. The fact that we're all the life of this beautiful planet, that we are all intimately connected to one another, and so we do no harm and we do our best to bring life to life all the time. So that's a big part of it. When you think about what heaven is, and when I talk to people about what they think heaven is, there are certain things that come to mind for everybody in terms of what they hope to experience when they go there, right? And that is that heaven is going to be a nice place, right? Everybody's going to be nice. So kindness is a big part of it. Heaven's going to be a truthful place where everybody's going to be honest. So honesty is a big part of it. It's going to be an equal place where everybody has a similar experience and nobody is arrogant or above anybody else. So humility will be a big part of it. It's a place where everybody's completely understood and where there is no real perfection. So forgiveness is a big part of it. There's a place where everybody experiences absolute empathy and supports one another, so compassion is a big part of it. And it's a place where everybody is really helpful, where they're willing to drop everything and help you out without having any conditions attached to it. So service, this kind of service for one another, is a big part of it. So I call those rungs on the ladder to heaven. If we can use kindness, honesty, humility, forgiveness, compassion, and service to align us spiritually with the perspective of heaven. And that's in the first part of the book.
And that sounds to me like the foundation of every major faith on earth. When you take away what I refer to as the man-made control and regulatory aspects of religion and get to the foundation, what you've just enumerated is exactly what God wants us to do.
Yeah, and heaven is the goal of every religion, really. You know, that's what it's all about. It's all about experiencing that kind of divine reconnection. And so those things that are common to the experience or the ideas of heaven, how you would expect everybody would be is how we need to be in this life. And we can be, and so we can bring and realize heaven on earth.
My guest, Robert Kopecky, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. Robert, thank you so much. Please tell our listeners one more time how they can get your book and find out more about your work.
The book is available online at all the major booksellers or in the major bookstores, and you can also get it on my website, which is www.robertkopecky.com, or at my blog, which is robertkopecky.blogspot.com, which is a little more up to date. And you can just Google me, it'll pop on your magic screen.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing your story and these wonderful experiences, and something that we can all truly aspire to.
Thank you, Victor. It's been a great pleasure and honor to be with you again.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.